Greetings, aspirants. Welcome to the second episode of the Voice of Civil Services. What, why, and how of Constitution. Enduku, Emiti, Ela. I'm your host, and today we'll delve into the fascinating world of constitutions. Now, in this episode, we'll explore the meaning of a constitution, its purpose, different types of constitution, and of course, how the Indian constitution was made. So, what exactly is a constitution? See, in simple words, a constitution is the rule book of a nation, which is the supreme law of the land. It acts as a foundation upon which a society is built, and it governs the functioning of the government. Every law made in the country must align with the principles and values enshrined in the constitution. Now, let's move on to the purpose of a constitution. Why do we need the constitution? Well, there are several important functions that a constitution serves. Firstly, a constitution provides a set of basic rules that enable coordination within the society. These rules establish the framework for how individuals and institutions interact, ensuring order and harmony. For instance, even though there's a lot of diversity in India, we don't see disturbances every day. This is because all of us and those institutions run according to the constitution. ఇంకొక ఎగ్జాంపుల్ తీసుకున్నట్టయితే మీరు మీ ఫ్రెండ్స్తో ఒక గేమ్ ఆడుతున్నారు అండ్ ఒక అభిప్రాయ భేదం వచ్చినప్పుడు వెన్ యూ ఫీల్ దట్ దేర్స్ ఎ డిస్టర్బెన్స్ బిట్వీన్ యూ బోత్ తను ఒకటి కరెక్ట్ అంటారు మీరు ఇంకొకటి కరెక్ట్ అంటారు బట్ యూ బోత్ ఫాలో ద రూల్స్ ఆఫ్ ద గేమ్ సో ఇన్ దట్ సెన్స్ కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్ ఈజ్ వెరీ ఇంపార్టెంట్. సెకండ్లీ, ఏ కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్ డిఫైన్స్ ద డిస్ట్రిబ్యూషన్ ఆఫ్ పవర్ విత్ ఇన్ అ సొసైటీ. ఇట్ స్పెసిఫైస్ హూ హ్యాస్ ద అథారిటీ టు మేక్ డెసిషన్స్ అండ్ హౌ ద గవర్నమెంట్ విల్ బీ స్ట్రక్చర్డ్. This allocation of power helps to prevent the concentration of authority in the hands of a few and promotes a system of checks and balances. For instance, there are legislature, executive, and judiciary whose powers are defined clearly. Though they follow the principle of separation of powers, there is also a system of checks and balances. Judiciary అన్నాం కదా, నాకు అతడు సినిమాలో ఒక డైలాగ్ గుర్తొచ్చింది. అదే మహేష్ బాబు సునీల్తో టీ షాప్కి వెళ్ళినప్పుడు వచ్చే డైలాగ్ అనమాట. అరే నువ్వు ఆగరా, వాడైతే లాయర్లో ఒకవైపే చెప్తాడు, నేనైతే జడ్జిలా ఇద్దరు వైపు చెప్తాను అని. సో అక్కడ మనం జుడిషియరీ ఫంక్షన్ ఏంటో అర్థం చేసుకోవచ్చు. థర్డ్లీ, ఏ కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్ సెట్స్ లిమిట్స్ ఆన్ ద యాక్షన్స్ ఆఫ్ ద గవర్నమెంట్. నో దాట్ దీస్ లిమిట్స్ ఆర్ ఫండమెంటల్ ఇన్ నేచర్ అండ్ దే ప్రొటెక్ట్ ద రైట్స్ అండ్ లిబర్టీస్ ఆఫ్ సిటిజన్స్. దే ఆల్సో యాక్ట్ యాజ్ ఎ సేఫ్ గార్డ్ అగెయిన్స్ట్ ద గవర్నమెంట్ ఓవర్ రీచ్ and it ensures prevention of individual freedoms. For example, the fundamental rights of Part 3 of the Constitution limits the government from turning arbitrary. Finally, a constitution enables the government to fulfill the aspirations of a society and creates conditions for a just society. The constitution reflects the shared principles, values, and identity of the people, providing a framework for a cohesive and inclusive nation. The values enshrined in it can be seen in the preamble itself. So, ఇప్పటి వరకు మనం కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్ పర్పస్ ఏంటో తెలుసుకుందాం. Now, let's briefly touch upon different types of constitutions. See, constitutions can vary in nature, ranging from written to unwritten, flexible to rigid, and federal to unitary. A written constitution, which is like the Indian constitution, is explicitly codified and documented in a single text. It provides a clear set of rules and principles for governance. On the other hand, an unwritten constitution like that of the United Kingdom is not codified into a single document, but rather comprises various statutes, court decisions, and conventions that have evolved over time. Constitutions can also differ in their flexibility. A flexible constitution allows for easy amendments and adaptations to changing circumstances, while a rigid constitution requires a more rigorous process to make these changes, typically safeguarding the core principles of the constitution. Know that our Indian constitution is partly rigid and partly flexible. Lastly, the nature of the polity in the constitutions can be categorized into either federal or unitary. A federal polity, like that one in the US, divides the power between a central government and various provincial or state governments. Whereas in a unitary nature like UK, power is concentrated at the national level with limited or no regional autonomy. Now that we have covered the fundamentals, let's explore the making of Indian Constitution. అసలు మన కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్ ఎవరు చేశారు, ఎలా చేశారు, ఎందరో మహానుభావులు అందరికీ నా వందనాలు. The Indian Constitution is a remarkable document that was drafted by a constituent assembly which consisted of representatives from across the country. Its members were chosen by an indirect election by the members of the provincial legislative assemblies. These had been established under the Government of India Act 1935. See, the Constituent Assembly was composed roughly along the lines suggested by the plan proposed by the Committee of the British Cabinet, which is known as the Cabinet Mission of 1946. The Constituent Assembly, under the leadership of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who worked tirelessly to create a constitution that would guide the independent nation. The drafting process involved intense debates, discussions, and compromises reflecting the diversity and aspirations of Indian people. After nearly 3 years of deliberations, the Indian Constitution was adopted on 26 January 1950, marking the birth of Republic of India. It remains the guiding light for our nation, upholding the principles of justice, equality, liberty and fraternity. సో ఇప్పుడు మన కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్కి ఉండే అథారిటీ ఎక్కడి నుంచి వచ్చింది? వాళ్ళందరూ జస్ట్ పబ్లిక్ రిప్రజెంటేటివ్స్ అవడం వలన? No, not just that. It draws its authority from the fact that the members of the Constituent Assembly engaged in what one might call public reason. The members of Assembly placed a great emphasis on discussion and reasoned arguments. They did not simply advance their own interests, but gave principled reasons to other members for their positions. Know that the Constituent Assembly had 8 major committees on different subjects. Usually, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Rajendra Prasad, Sardar Patel, Maulana Azad or Ambedkar chaired these committees. Each committee usually drafted particular provisions of the constitution which were then subjected to debate by the entire assembly. Usually an attempt was made to reach a consensus with the belief that the provisions be agreed by all. Also would not be detrimental to any particular interest. Some provisions were subject to the vote. But in each instance, every single argument, query, and concern were responded to great care and in writing. But no constitution is simply a product of the assembly that produces it. An assembly as diverse as the Constituent Assembly of India could not have functioned if there was no background consensus on the main principles the constitution should enshrine. These principles were forged during the long struggle for our freedom. In a way, the Constituent Assembly was giving concrete shape and form to the principles it had inherited from the nationalist movement. The best summary of the principles that the nationalist movement brought to the Constituent Assembly is the Objectives Resolution, which was moved by Pandit Nehru in 1946. This resolution encapsulated the aspirations and values behind the Constitution. Based on this resolution, our Constitution gave institutional expression to these fundamental commitments like the equality, liberty, democracy, and sovereignty. Thus, our Constitution is not merely a maze of rules and procedures, but a moral commitment to establish a government that will fulfill the many promises that the nationalist movement held before the people. Though we have a constitution, there is also a need for a balanced arrangement of the institutions of the government. So the basic principle is that the government must be democratic and committed to the welfare of the people. The Constituent Assembly spent a lot of time on evolving the right balance among various institutions like the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. This led to the adoption of parliamentary form of government with the federal arrangement, which would distribute the government powers between the legislature and the executive on one hand and between the states and the central government on the other hand. So they borrowed a number of provisions from different countries. But borrowing these ideas was not just any imitation, but it was very far from it. Each provision of our constitution had to be defended on the grounds that it suited to the Indian problems and aspirations. And that brings us to the end of the episode of the Voice of Civil Services. We hope you have gained a deeper understanding of what a constitution is, its purpose, different types of constitutions, and the making of Indian constitution. Join us next time as we continue to unravel the fascinating world of civil services.